So there's been a lot of references to thinkers and philosophers and stuff, and I want to kind of continue that tradition. So we've had what? British, German, French. Who else? What other nationalities? Swedish philosophers. Who? That's not even a thing. There's not American philosophers. I'd like to share with you guys one of my favorite Spanish philosophers. You might have heard of him. His name's Inigo Montoya. And he really challenges us to think about the words we use, because sometimes they don't mean what we think they mean. Have you guys all experienced this, right? So here's the thing about quality. I think it's a very nebulous term. What does it mean? It means lots of things to lots of people. Esther mentioned a gentleman, Jerry Weinberg. This is an oldie but a goodie. I love this definition of quality. It's value to some person. Now, that's a little bit less nebulous, but value is still a pretty nebulous term, right? So the reason I like it, though, is if we can just map quality to value, we have much more interesting discussions about value, especially value to some person, because then we're talking about usually our customer or our consumer or something like that, right? So I think it's a better place to start from than trying to wrestle with what is or isn't quality. So I also realized, because I think every talk has had a Snowden reference, especially Snowden's. So I know he's not here. I was going to kind of poke at him a little bit, but who recognizes this Snowden reference? The truth is coming and it cannot be stopped. So actually that's Ed Snowden, not Dave. But this does illustrate a really key point. Who was thinking I was talking about Dave? Really? Only like 4 of you? Seriously, who thought I was talking about Dave? Like most of you guys, right? So context matters, right? So we're all thinking maybe I met a Snowden that we all had shared with, right? So here's the thing. I think that quality, in terms of the value that we're going to deliver, has 3 high-level facets, 3 facets of quality. So who here knows about usability? 1 or 2 people. Awesome, great. So UX, right? So do I need to do that in slow motion so you can tweet that? Right. So this is Percy Fawcett, a lesser well-known British archaeologist and explorer. And to me, Percy Fawcett does a great job at representing the facet of usability. See what I did there? All right. This guy is Dr. James Fawcett, and I think he does a really good job kind of exemplifying the facet of maintainability. Who cares about maintainability in their product? 1 or 2 people. That's scary. So who thinks maintainability is UX? To me, a maintainable product means that we can change it, we can fix it, right? Stuff like that. And I think that's really important for a user's holistic experience or long-run experience. And last but certainly not least is Kim. Guess. Fawcett, right. I had to really dig deep for this one. She's actually a Connecticut state senator, but her kind of general position, as much as you can trust any senator's position, is that she thinks that government should be there for its people when they need it. So when I think about all of the DevOps and the operations and production systems and our deployment systems, I think she is the faucet that represents the facet of reliability. So 3 facets of quality, 3 faucets to help you remember them. Fair? You guys are all like, just get this guy out. That's a really bad joke. Don't worry, there's more bad jokes. So how do we influence this flow of product quality? So there's been lots of great books tossed around. I wanted to share some of my favorites. These definitely helped influence my thinking about, well, pretty much everything. Life is a choose-your-own-adventure. Options and options thinking, right? I really like this one. This is about working in corporate America. House of Danger, choose your own adventure. Then, luckily they published a how-to guide. You are a shark. This is actually how you survive in corporate environments, right? And if you can't pull that off, I love this one. Choose your own adventure. You're going to die. Look at that sad face. And I like it's kind of a gender-neutral child. Like, it doesn't matter. Man, woman, you're going to die. So choose your own adventure, and I actually think that this talk could be a choose your own adventure if we had that much time. It'd be great. Just like, oh, go to slide 32 now. So if this talk was going to be about product design, I would refer to an American philosopher, Avril Lavigne. What? No? Oh, really? That's American. It's a North American. I mean, really, North America and South America are really just one big continent, and we actually cut the Panama Canal to make sure they knew, no, you're your own thing down there, continent. So she, again, much like Inigo, challenges us with a very deep life question. Why do you have to go and make things so complicated, especially with product design when it's certainly complex. Right, we would talk about things like market research. We would talk about things like user studies and going. Do you guys ever hear going to the Gemba, but you hear going back to Cali in your mind? I'm going to the Gemba. No? All right, I might have just dated myself. I dated myself a lot in high school. We might talk about experiment design. We'd talk about interaction design. We'd talk about ethnography. We'd talk about narrative sensing. These are the things that we would talk about if this was going to be a product design talk, but it's not. So if this were going to be a product development talk, I would look at this group of thought leaders that actually challenge us around product development. They give us insights. Don't go chasing waterfall. It doesn't work out. And they even give us a little insight into what that means. But I think you're moving too fast. Maybe slow down. I could have gone with Simon and Garfunkel on this one too. Slow down. You move too fast. You got to make the moment last. Anyways, really great people, TLC, good friends of mine. So they would tell us, right, we would talk about iterative and incremental development, because who's experienced incremental development? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Who agrees that incremental development is better than excremental development? Which is what a lot of places were doing before this, right? Yeah. So we would talk about that. We would talk about code is design. We don't build with code, we're designing. It's just a lower level of design, like blueprints for a bridge that someone else decided where the city planner was going to put it. We would talk about testing intentionally. We would talk about that test pyramid. We'd talk about understanding what tests we want to run in which environments. We'd talk about pulling tests through the system. We would talk about balancing that pyramid with unit and behavioral and functional and integrative and systems and load and perf. And we'd understand that as we go up that pyramid, we increase variability. And as we go down that pyramid, we actually decrease the cost of running and maintaining the test harness. We would also probably talk a little bit about balancing automation with exploration. Right? So automation is necessary but not sufficient. It frees up the time from the good creative testing humans to do good manual exploratory testing or user testing. All right, but this isn't a product development talk either. If this was a product deployment talk, now these are actually all happening this afternoon, we would talk, who knows this group of philosophers from the 80s? Salt and Pepper. Yeah. Now, they were way ahead of their time. What source control stuff were you guys using in the 80s? Who was using Git? Did Git even exist? No. But look what they were saying. You need to push it. They were already talking about distributed version control in the 80s. And not just push it like fuck it, ship it. No, you need to push it good. Quality matters. And they give us insight into some aspects of what that means to them. You have to make it fast. We need fast signaling. We need fast feedback. We don't know, is our build broken, right? It's not TLC. Salt and Pepper cared about having a good deployment pipeline. So if this was a product deployment talk, we would talk about some things like maybe the build is the #1 feature of our product. We might say that our deployment is software, and therefore we should code it and test it as such. We might say we need to have a testable pipeline, not a detestable pipeline like most places have. We would probably talk about having load or no branching, or maybe using feature toggles to manage that type of stuff. We'd probably talk about DevOps is not a person. Is this a thing at any places? Like, we need a DevOps guy. Yeah, like, well, find that unicorn for me. And this is my favorite one, that we'd probably talk a little bit about it needs to be culture and tools, not a culture of tools. Yeah, all right. Sorry, I have to stay by this X. All right, so it's not a product deployment talk either. Now, if we were going to talk about flow, now luckily Klaus already talked about flow, but one thing that we might talk about, probably the very first and most important thing if we were going to talk about flow, is we need to consider the whole. We'd probably talk about things being pull-based. We'd probably talk about utilization. Yeah, we would. We'd talk about limiting work in progress. No more than 1 or 2 or 3 things. Right, you got to be careful with that. Queuing theory, line that stuff up. We'd probably talk about batch size, kind of limiting work in progress. Batch size, very related. We would probably talk about cost of delay because nobody wants to find that shit out too late, right? Yeah, exactly. By the there's another book being given away if you can guess how many squirrels are hiding in Jabe's beard. But you might sense a pattern here. This is actually not a flow talk either. We're actually going to talk about design. You guys know this design champion? Does anybody know who this guy is, actually? Woo! Who's heard of Conway's Law? Yeah. Now, this is not Conway's Law. These are lyrics from a song by Conway Twitty, a wonderful American vocalist and philosopher and hairstylist. Yeah, so I'm going to read that. I know you guys can read, or most of you guys can read, but I think this is important because when design goes wrong at any level, whether it's product design or code design or architecture or deployment design, when we're designing anything in that spectrum of stuff, when it goes wrong, this is how it makes you feel. And you need a country singer to get the feels on this one, right? Oh, I just can't make it any longer. Everything I do is always wrong. I'm living a lie, and there's no need in trying to keep hanging on after all the good is gone. Who's ever used a product that made them feel that way? All the good is gone out of the product. My whole life is a lie. I can't do anything right. Have you ever had a product make you feel that way? I can't do anything right. Microsoft Word. Now, this is actually Conway's Law. It's Melvin Conway, not Conway Twitty. It's a common mistake. Conway Twitty actually, after graduating with a computer science degree, went into country music. Now, I think Melvin Conway is a bit verbose. I think he could have found a way of being more succinct about this, but I think it's important too, so I'm going to read it out. Organizations which design systems, which I think we all do and agree we do, are constrained, and probably not in the good way, are constrained to produce designs or produce systems, which have been designed, which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. Who's heard this before? Just a quick show of hands, not that I can really see them. Who's never heard this before? All right, so I've heard this a lot kind of growing up in the tech space, and I actually have a really great story where I was working at a company in Boston, and they had a product, and they had a satellite office that was in Presque Isle, Maine. Anybody know where Presque Isle, Maine is? You drive on the interstate till you hit Canada, you turn left, and you drive for like 2 more hours north. So the way that these people talked was they tried to get a hold of each other by the phone. That didn't work out very well all the time. And, I called you, but I left a message. Well, I didn't get the message because I went home. Well, I tried calling your mobile, but you had it turned off. It was on vibrate. You were in a meeting, right? So when they actually had to make these two products interface, the main product, the team in Boston, basically just wrapped up all their stuff into a nice little file, and then they put it out onto an FTP server, of all things. And then the other product, they didn't even let anybody know. It was just like, here's a file, right? And then the other team had to code up their side of the product to just kind of keep pinging that server. Hey, you got a file? Hey, how about now? How about now? How about now? I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. And then, oh, what was your file? I'm going to take you and I'm going to break you down to stuff, right? So this is a great example of Conway's Law. They actually architected their systems to integrate exactly how the people tried to talk, which was kind of crazy. But I think this applies more to just our technical systems or our architectural choices. I think this applies not just to dev teams, but to our whole org. Who's ever even sensed a mild, maybe minuscule butting of heads between, say, sales and product management? Maybe dev and testing? Maybe dev and support? Maybe dev and professional services? I'm noticing a pattern. It's always dev that's got these problems. So I think that we're going to talk about design, but we're not going to talk about product design. We're actually going to talk about organization design, because as the other Conway, Melvin, helped us realize, is that if this is true, this scales all the way up. The entire design of our products, how it works, especially over the long run course of the life of the product, it's going to be shaped by how our organization works and coheres and connects and stuff like that. So there are many aspects of organization design. But one thing is true for all of them. They're complex adaptive systems, right? So we've been talking a lot about systems and complexity and stuff like that. So none of these fish know what they're doing. They're not going, hey guys, let's make a vortex. That would be really cool. They're just going, hey man, you're over there, I'm going to follow you. And they make these neat patterns, right? They look like bigger things to scare off the little predators. So somehow they know how to do this. So we're going to talk about three things around organization design stuff. And I guess my premise here is that this is the flow of product quality. If quality is value, and value needs to be designed, and if design is going to be influenced by the communication patterns and connections in our organization, product design and organization design are just two sides of the same coin, or perhaps a mirror and a product. So we're going to talk a little bit about structure. This could be both physical stuff, but it could also be less tangible things like org charts and policies and stuff. We're going to talk a little bit about just communication. This is an overloaded word, but this is literally just how do I speak intelligently with somebody, right? And then another really overused word, which is collaboration. I think we just say it. Who thinks these are synonyms? Collaboration and communication. Sweet. Maybe it's one person. Okay. Yeah. We'll have to. I'm gonna beat you up later. But so I think we forget that it's co together, labor, work, right? Labor. We're gonna do work together. We're gonna actually interact to produce a thing. So the first thing we're gonna do is talk about structure. 80s reference, everybody? Yeah? All right. I love these little quotes. My favorite one is actually from Happy Gilmore about, I'm going to eat pieces of shit like you for breakfast. But that just didn't really work its way in here at all. But so these guys talk about eating things for breakfast, and I thought they should join the Breakfast Club. So one aspect of structure is considering sort of a systems diagram. So I'm really glad that Esther and Mark went before me, because all of this stuff is about the system and seeing the network of how things are connected. So organization system diagram can help us see the structure of the org. And then some folks have already talked about value streams or value stream maps, which is sort of the flow of value to our customer or consumer. I also really like the challenge of trying to overlay these two things. Just to kind of see what in our entire context is affecting our value flow besides work items being shifted and handed back and forth. So the first thing, the systems diagram, might look a little bit like this. So this is a very scrubbed version of an actual client where we did this. And as you can see, we've got three different kinds of connections. So it's a system, so we see all the parts. It's a human system, so the parts are people or groups of people. And then systems mean the parts are interconnected, and they're interconnected in many different ways. So we started with the simple thing, right? So we started with the black lines. The black lines are just the reporting structure. Who is whose boss and stuff like that. We talked about workflow, or really how decisions were made. So you can kind of see some things that were connected there. And then we just kind of nebulously said influence. Where do you think influence? And we found it's like, well, where people either used to work in other departments or other groups, or had friends or relatives in other areas, we found that this was that hidden network. This is how people got things done when the way that you were supposed to get things done inevitably didn't work. So the thing I like to do is try to then, if this is a really, really simplified happy path value stream, like we did the value stream activity in its own space, and then we basically just took what should be the happy path, and we overlaid it onto this. Now, given what you kind of see here, does anybody see anything that might hinder flow of value? Did anybody notice that the ops group reports to finance? That's not an uncommon structural choice at places that I go and visit. Who noticed that the BAs and the testers report basically into the PMO? That could be weird. Maybe some different incentives there. Who's boss? What are we trying to get done? What's that weird back and forth? Like, how do we even get, so we got a customer, in this case in particular, sales usually initiated. So sales, we would start with sales. They found a customer. That'd go back and forth. And then once sales has whatever it thinks it has, it then goes to finance, which was also held responsible for legal. Legal then wraps up a contract signed and hands it off to the PMO. PMO selects a project manager to handle that. And then the project manager then gives it to their analysts and starts working with the dev manager to do resource planning. There's a whole lot of work that got done before anybody got involved in saying whether or not we should or could do this. Interesting stuff, right? So I would recommend this is one way. I'm not saying this is the right way or even the best way. It's a way that I find useful because I find it very visual. What about communication? Whoever feels like this is how communication works at their place? The cone of silence. Sometimes you wish you had this. You're like, I want to put it on that guy over there. Hey, what are you doing? Oh, yeah, I'll come over tonight. It'll be great. Anyways, but even when we do get to talk, I think sometimes we don't do a good job at relating. So really, the biggest message, and I think it's a pretty simple factor here, communication, is we just need to be a little bit more intentional. And I don't mean big, giant, racy matrices or whatever. I mean, if that's working for you, game on. But I kind of think we need to think about who our audience is. This is just good writing or good communication education, right? Who's your audience? Who are you trying to communicate to? When you think about who that audience is, think about directionality. A lot of things people assume are two ways, but either the way they say it or the opportunities for feedback they give or don't give, they don't really encourage two-way communication. So they're like, of course, I've got an open door policy that nobody ever walks through ever. All right, frequency. So this is pretty obvious, right? How often should we do it? Are we using the right frequency for the right kind of communication to the right audience? You can see this thing kind of stacks, right? And then finally, fidelity. So I think of both the bandwidth. Are we giving the right amount of stuff? Is it too much detail? Is it not enough detail? You need to consider, again, who's your audience and what are you trying to achieve? Because, too much detail can crush optionality to move forward, but not enough detail, people can fizzle out and just not make any decisions or get any direction at all. So there's sort of a Goldilocks problem here, right? You should also consider the channel when you think about fidelity. So like, well, I want to have really highly collaborative conversations in email. Right, not going to happen. Well, then I'll just use instant messenger. Has anybody had like an organizational policy where like if you have to send an email back more than once, you should just go talk to the person or call them if they're not in your location? I think like a billion places would be better if they just enacted that simple little policy. You're not allowed to send, it's not allowed to bounce more than 3 times. So just be more intentional, just a little more thoughtful about what you're trying to achieve with what you're trying to communicate. And lastly, collaboration. Come together right now. All right, so I think that what we want to try to do is build a community of problem solvers. I think too often we say, cross-functional teams. Who's heard that? Who's sick of hearing that? Yeah. Then you know what cross-functional team usually means? I'm going to take you and you and you and you, and now you're all going to sit here together like the Beatles. So it's good to some extent. It's probably better than having them in siloed departments spread all over the globe, but we want a community of problem solvers. what used to happen in communities, and I know we've kind of lost this, at least in the States a little bit, is different people with different specialties work together for the betterment of the community. In this case, our communities of problem solvers should be designing products and systems, right? So how are those people in those communities connected, and how do the communities interconnect with one another too? These are all problems with how we replicate and scale and stuff like that. So here's another fun term, especially in the Agile community. Who's heard generalizing specialist? Who feels like that's like just getting kicked in the junk? Yeah. You know what, man? I actually really like the concept of a generalizing specialist. It's a great concept. You know what management usually hears? Generalizing generalist. You're all hot swappable cogs. The resource balancing spreadsheets practically balance themselves. It's great. Balance. So I like the idea because I do think that if we're going to truly collaborate, especially in cross-specialization teams, I need to know a little bit about what you do and maybe how you do it, but I don't need to be you. I don't need to be a designer or a tester or all of those things, right? I can't possibly be an expert or a really well-specialized craftsperson in all of those things. So that's not a good expectation. So here's a model, and like Monty Python says, it's only a model. Like George Box says, all models are wrong. That includes this one. This is a wrong model. But some models are useful. I find this useful, and I'm going to show you how I find it useful. And if you find it useful, great. Also, it's a bell curve. When you draw bell curves on whiteboards, people are like, holy shit, you're smart. You're like, yes, it's a bell curve. I try to keep it pretty lowbrow, low key. So like on the bottom axis here, we've got, this is the timeline. It's time, and there's a timeline of stuff you need to know to become a specialist in a craft, right? In whatever craft you are specializing in. And then up and down is just, there's an amount of stuff to know. Good so far? Pretty straightforward, bell curve, right? All right, so here's the thing. There's a basic amount of stuff to know. This is true for everybody. If you're going to start a specialty, there's basic stuff you need to know to get started, right? Yes? Good? Okay. So if you're going to try to generalize, I think you also need to know the basics, right? So the basics, I think, from a generalist perspective, help us with two things. One is, it just increases our awareness. If I know some of the basics of your craft, when I'm over here doing my craft in my little micro silo, because we're practicing smaller fall in our cross-functional team, then basically I am now more aware of what you do and how you do it, so when I can theoretically be more conscientious of what I'm doing and how it might impact you. The other thing is it allows us to actually move towards communication. So if I know the basics of your craft, my goal is to be able to speak at least moderately intelligently about what you do with you. So those are sort of your goals. If you're the specialist and you're trying to help someone generalize towards your specialty, help teach them just the basics. And these can be really basic. This could just be like a couple of little tools or a set of terminology. There's not a whole lot. This is like the Comp Sci 101 of programming, for example. Now, here's the tricky part, right? So as specialists, we spend years and years and years and years and lots of time, and there's hordes and hordes and hordes of stuff to learn. And we spend probably the majority of our career in this space learning all of the advanced stuff there is to know to become a deep practicing craftsperson. So here's the deal, though. If we're going to generalize, we have to draw a big giant X to this. We can't learn everything about every craft. True? So here's the deal, though. I think when the specialist is practicing long enough, we can start distilling that advanced stuff into just like meta principles, right? So we start understanding things very intuitively. We develop our spidey sense. And we usually say things too, like, oh, there's a smell, or I feel that it's not right, or it's these nebulous words that aren't very technical. We kind of start relating to them in more almost emotional ways. Now here's the trick, though. A generalist won't ever be able to know the meta, right? Because they didn't do the advanced. You have to go through the advanced to get to the meta, to get to the intuitive sensing. But what you can do as a specialist is take that meta knowledge, those meta principles that you've developed, and you can turn those into heuristics. It's almost like taking stuff out of the complex, or actually probably the complicated domain, and pushing it down into obvious. Now, the problem with obvious stuff is sometimes it's wrong. But that's okay, because if we're collaborating together, if we're working together on a paired task, or we're swarming or mobbing or something, something like that. I'm not the one doing the work. You're the specialist. I'm there as a second set of eyes. I'm sitting there with another brain with a different set of experiences and different perspective. And that's what we want this community of problem solvers to be. So what we realize is there's a little amount of things to know that's basic, and there's a little amount of things to know that are heuristic. And if you, as the specialist, can help teach people what's the basics and what's the heuristics for your craft, you can help people generalize towards you. And you can develop this over and over and over. So one of the things that I would challenge you guys all to do over the next couple of days is think about this model. Just jot down, what are some of the basics? What are the things that you think a non-specialist in your craft would need to know that you would like them to be aware of? Or that you would like them to know to be able to communicate with you a little bit more intelligently about what you do? And then think about what sets off your spidey sense. And then try to see if you can codify that a little bit. Can you jot down some little rules or little thumbs? It won't always be right, but there are things that, you know, if someone kind of taps you on the shoulder and you said, hey, you said when this happens, I should point that out to you. And sometimes, as the specialist, you go, yep, that's right. However, in this case, it's okay. And sometimes you'd be like, oh, shit, yeah, thanks. that's great. Thanks for catching my blind spot. All right. So kind of looping it back around to famous, philosophers and thinkers. We're gonna have Missy Elliott take us through some takeaways. So I think the first thing I'd really like you guys to take out of this is there's many facets and faucets of quality. Context matters through those three, the usability, maintainability, reliability, so you have to be intentional. You can't do quality on everything all the time because it's the same thing as saying we want to deliver all the value to everybody in the first release. You can't do it. All right, the second takeaway is product design reflects organization design. You need to do both. You need to be intentional about designing both of those things because they're really just two sides of the same coin. And last but not least, think about that model. We want to grow collaborative communities of problem solvers, and we can do that by trying to embrace what generalizing specialist is supposed to mean, not what balanced spreadsheet managers want it to mean. All right, that's it. Thanks, guys.